Hey, Driven Youth. Well, Esther chapter 10, that was an easy chapter to read, wasn't it? 3 verses. I'm sure it didn't take you that long, but how long did it take you to think through what God might have been teaching you through that? What was the application that we were to receive from that? Uh, I think maybe from the book itself in Esther, we conclude this whole book with kind of how it began. In the beginning, we have a description of King Ahasuerus and his kingdom, and that it was greatly prospering. He had so much wealth, he had so much land. And we have that one sentence in chapter 10, well, the first sentence there in chapter 10, where it talks about taxes. And what in the world is that all about? I think, I think it's an indication that King Ahasuerus' kingdom continues to prosper, and the people continue to prosper. And so he imposes a tax on them. And so he's receiving wealth from the people, and the kingdom is just prospering. People, I guess people have jobs, all those kinds of things. So I think it's an indication that the kingdom is going to continue to prosper, at least for a time. And then we have in verses 2 and 3 a description of Mordecai, and we end with him. And that Mordecai was exalted to this high position by the king with honor, great power. He was second in command to King Ahasuerus. What does that remind you of? Does it remind you of another story or event in Scripture that took place, another person? It does to me. It reminds me of Joseph, who through God's providential work through that situation, or through Joseph's life, being thrown into a pit, being sold into slavery, being thrown in prison unjustly, 2 years or so in prison, then finally being brought into a position of power, authority, used of God for what purpose? Not only to be used to save an entire nation, the Egyptian nation and the surrounding nations, but also used to protect, preserve, and save God's people. And in a similar way, Mordecai was brought into power, second in command, great authority, great power, and he was used to save, preserve, protect God's people. And so we see here that this is a Joseph-like figure. And we kind of see these Joseph-like figures throughout the Scripture. You could even say, to some extent, you have Joseph in Genesis chapter 50, and then we have Moses as a kind of maybe a Joseph-like character figure. And I don't want to go too far with this, but it seems like a pattern. We have Mordecai, we have Daniel as a Joseph-like figure. Maybe we could continue on with that. But the prime example of this Joseph-like figure is Jesus himself. Now, I'm not really sure that the scriptures connect those two, so I'm just kind of making an allusion, all right? But Jesus was a Joseph-like figure, okay? So he was put to death, and it seemed hopeless, and all of a sudden he's raised to glory. Raised to glory to the right hand of God the Father. For what purpose? To protect, preserve, and to save his people. His whole purpose for coming, Jesus' whole purpose for coming, was to seek and to save those who were lost, in order to bring into his kingdom, to make citizens for his kingdom. And we see here Mordecai, that kind of same example of a person brought into power. And what does he do? He serves God's people. He's for God's people. And that's what he does. So he was great among the Jews, verse 3, and popular with the multitude of his brothers. God gave him favor in this way. For what did he do? He sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. Maybe another kind of translation was that he spoke for his people, that there were still opposition in the kingdom, so he was always speaking for the benefit of God's people. And so he prospered. Remind me of this, maybe an application for myself was that you and I, we are a part of the church. This is God's people during this day and age, all right? And we need to be for the welfare of God's people. One of our main concerns as believers in Jesus Christ is for the benefit and welfare of God's people. We always need to have an eye towards the Lord's people and their benefit. And so we come to church not simply to gain for ourselves, which that's one thing we should do, spiritual gains for ourselves, but we need to have an eye out for the welfare of God's people. And we can do this in simple ways. Knowing a need or hearing of a need in God's people, we go and try to meet that need the best we can. We go and live a good life, an obedient life, so that people can see us, be encouraged by that, and try to emulate those things. We go, Hebrews chapter 10 tells us that we need to ponder or consider how we can spur one another on to love and good deeds. Ephesians chapter 4, we need to be for the edification of the body, the building up of the body. Man, this is one of our goals. One of our main objectives as Christians is to build up the body of Jesus Christ. We need to be for God's people. For God's people. And God blesses that. God blesses that. Because that's what he's for. So do you want to be for God and his purposes? Then you need to be for God's people. Even the real difficult ones to be around. We need to think how we can benefit other people. Well, that was Esther chapter 10. We finished the book of Esther. What an incredible book. What an incredible story it was indeed. A lot of lessons there learned about God's providential work in mankind. God's providential work, that is, his preserving and protecting God's people and moving along his purposes and plan throughout mankind and for his people. Well, so this is what I thought we could do next, is we move on to a different book, all right? Not very creative, but I think it's extremely beneficial. Maybe we can do this together. Let's move on tomorrow. Tomorrow would be Thursday, okay? Let's move on tomorrow, 1 Peter. Let's go to 1 Peter. The reason I was just thinking of 1 Peter is like, well, let's move into the New Testament again. But in 1 Peter, he starts off this way. He says, to those who are elect exiles, all right? So we're talking about exiles again. That's kind of his focus on here. He used the word exiles, I think, a couple times in 1 Peter as he writes this. So well, that's what we're exiles. This is the exile challenge. Move on to another exile book. So when he's referring to exiles, it's not just the fact that they are away from Jerusalem. That's not what Peter's saying. What he's saying is that you are exiles in the sense of your citizenship is somewhere else. Your kingdom is somewhere else. We're waiting for a heavenly kingdom. And so we are exiles from that kingdom right now, okay? So that's kind of the idea that Peter's getting across. Not the fact that they're just away from Jerusalem. That's not what he's talking about. So he's using it as kind of a metaphor for you and I, okay? So I look forward to it. There's a lot in 1 Peter. Should take us to Wednesday if we do it right. So let's open up the book of 1 Peter coming tomorrow morning. That would be Thursday. Oh, I don't even know what day it is. May the 7th, I think. All right. Well, look forward again to getting back with you. I'm praying for you. Let me know how I can pray for you more specifically. Praying for you seniors as you're making plans, as graduation plans I know didn't go as planned. But you know what? That's God's plan. And what is God's plan? God's plans are always good. All right? They're always good. We might not like it, but we have to remind ourselves they're always good. So I'm praying for you seniors specifically. And I'm also praying that God is going to use us this summer as, God willing, camps will open up. And so we're still projecting, we're still anticipating that camps, I think it's the second week of June, are going to open up. And so we'll try to figure out how we're going to do training. With that, it'll probably be some sort of modified version of training, camp training. But be ready and think. Go online and look at our calendar about the when the camps are are going to be, all right, and see which camps that you can participate in as a camp counselor, okay? So just be ready for that. All right, guys, miss you so much and can't wait to see you again. God bless.